Prepare yourself for tales of the creepy, the terrible, and the awful things that hide in the night. Welcome to these dark spaces. A Perfect Thanksgiving. Standing in the kitchen, Danny sighed contentedly. He was so happy to be home, especially for the holidays. It had been a very long time since he'd seen his family, and he was looking forward to spending some quality time with everyone. It had been 8 long years since that night he was caught by the undercover officer and arrested for drug possession, but after a review from the prison board, he was let out early for good behavior. Danny smiled to himself and thought, yes, good behavior. Danny set down the mixing bowl he'd been stirring absent-mindedly and inhaled deeply. The scents of the holiday were all around him, and he was instantly transported back to when he was just a child, running the halls of this same house, impatient for ice cream and pie. He remembered his dad standing at the counter by the sink, slicing up a too large turkey with their electric carving knife, its loud buzz drowning out almost all other noises. He remembered the smell of the sweet potatoes in the oven, their rich cinnamon and buttery scent wafting through the house. Just thinking about it was making his mouth water. He'd snapped out of his memories with a jolt and realized he'd forgotten to put them in the oven. Luckily, he remembered to preheat it, and his mom had already gotten them ready to just drop in the oven. He set a timer and moved back to the counter where he'd set the bowl down. Despite his mom preparing almost everything ahead of time, there were still a few things that needed to be finished up. Danny had told his mom that this year he'd take care of all the prep, and she, his dad, and his older brother could just relax. He'd loved the look on their faces when he'd shown up at the door unannounced. He kept him being out of prison a secret so that he could surprise them as a sort of special holiday treat. His mom answered the door and immediately called for his dad to come see who it is. His dad had embraced him and shouted at Danny's brother that he was home. His brother had waved from the couch, but didn't make any move to come to the door. His brother. The relationship between Danny and his brother had always been strained, to say the least. Danny's older brother, Jordan, had always been his parents' clear favorite. From Danny's perspective, they thought Jordan could do no wrong. He was their golden boy. And Danny? Well, they loved Danny too. No matter how hard he tried, Danny just couldn't seem to measure up. He struggled a lot more than Jordan in school and was never very good in social situations, ending up a bit of a loner. This isolation left him looking for ways to dull the pain of the constant struggle, and so he turned to drugs. After about a year of using and, despite his parents' pleas and offers of help, he'd become even more isolated than ever. Then came the bust. His usual dealer was MIA, so he went to another dealer a fellow user recommended. The one that turned out to be the undercover cop. The next thing Danny knew, he was thrown into the back of a police car and taken off to be processed. He probably could have gotten off with a lighter sentence if he hadn't tried to run when they took him out of the prison. He was eventually moved to the state prison to serve out his time. That was where he met the old man. Danny kept mostly to himself, preferring to stay as inconspicuous as possible, so as not to draw the attention of some of the less desirables that resided in the cells around him. Danny was sitting outside, eyes closed and enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face, when the old man sat down next to him. Danny jumped, startled, but calmed as soon as he saw the broad smile on the old man's face. Danny would never come to find out his actual name, and according to the man, he preferred to go by Old Man anyway. Danny and the old man soon struck up an odd sort of friendship. Danny had told him about his past, and the old man, in turn, shared some about his. The old man had done some terrible things when he was younger, things that made even Danny squirm hearing about them. The old man said that he knew he'd never again see freedom because of them, so he'd made the best of things here on the inside. He'd even started to help out at the prison library a few days a week. They'd become good friends over time, so it was no surprise when Danny saw the old man heading straight towards him, a look of determination on his face. He sat down next to Danny and leaned over close to his ear. "Meet me in the library," he whispered hoarsely, and got up and left just as quickly as he'd come. Danny stood up and followed, walking the 5 minutes down the hall to the door inset into the cinder block wall with the small sign reading "Library" in the center. He entered and looked for the old man. A sharp hissing sound came from somewhere beside him, behind the row of standing bookshelves. Danny ducked around and found the old man there, struggling a bit with a large book under one arm. Though to call it a book is generous, but as Danny would come to find out, that's exactly what the mass of scraps of paper were. The old man dragged Danny to a table at the far end of the library and dropped the book between them. He leaned in and motioned for Danny to do the same. "I have something very important to tell you, boy," he whispered. He spun the book around and pointed at the cover. In neat black block letters it read, "The Agony." Danny was confused. "You wrote a book?" he asked, a little too loudly. The old man put a finger to his lips. The old man shook his head and continued quietly. "No, me? No. I'm just the messenger. The book was written by the one that visits me. The angel, Amatiel, comes to me in the night, and I transcribe her words." He stabbed the book with one finger for effect, "and what she has revealed to me is terrible. But the contents of this book aren't for everyone to know." The old man had a bit of a crazed look in his eye. There would be mass panic if others found out. So this is our little secret for now. Danny sat back in his chair and exhaled deeply. He started to wonder if the old man was reaching that age where things they see aren't always completely real. But the old man was his friend, so the nice thing to do was listen. Besides, neither Danny or the old man were going anywhere. "All right, tell me then. Tell me about this." Danny checked the book again. "This agony the angel told you about." The old man nodded happily and turned the book open to the first page. Where Danny expected to see hastily written ramblings and maybe a few crude pictures, were pages and pages of neat handwritten text next to detailed images, as if drawn by a master artist. Danny looked up at the old man, confused. "How long have you been working on this?" he asked. "Every possible moment for 20 years, the old man replied. Still amazed, Danny flipped through the pages, each more incredible than the last, becoming more convinced that maybe this wasn't the work of a man whose grip on reality was starting to slip away. The old man grabbed the book back from Danny and flipped it to a section closer to the end. "Here, this is why I wanted you to come," he said, turning the book back around and pointing to the page. Danny read the title aloud. "The End Times." The text described a different sort of end times than most religious texts out there. In this book's description, the end wasn't about the destruction of all things. It was about the enslavement of man by creatures it called the Crossing. Danny glanced up at the old man with narrowed eyes, but then continued reading. The book described these Crossing as higher dimensional beings that could exist in our world as humans, consuming them from the inside until they were no more than a hollow shell. But until the end time comes, they only watch, unseen and unknown by humans. Danny continued reading. One day, the end times will be triggered when one person, the one the book calls the martyr, makes a discovery that exposes the Crossing for what they are, and the threat they will ultimately propose to the human race. The Crossing will then jump into action. Their first wave will kill millions, including the martyr. When they die, it triggers a global uprising against the Crossing. Humanity will unify against this enemy and stop at nothing to try to stop them. But nothing they try seems to work. Then, out of what the book calls a humble place, another person, the hero, will rise up through the ranks and lead the people in a rebellion against the large Crossing stronghold. They will wipe out many of the Crossing forces, severing their connection to this world using a weapon it called the Piercing Blade. A weapon that was imparted upon the hero by Amitil herself. But then, in a moment of distraction, the hero will be killed by a Crossing. And, without their hero to protect them, it results in the slaughter of the remaining human forces. In the end, the Crossing will defeat mankind and enslave them, essentially turning them into fuel, forcefully breeding them to keep the flow of power continuous. And that's where the book ends. Danny sat back. That's it? That's how your visions say it all ends, with humanity losing no matter what? The old man smiled, a glint in his eye. Ah, but that's where things get interesting. When I was receiving the book from Amitil, she didn't provide it in order. She would tell the story of one part, jump to another, and then back to the first, expecting me to keep up. I think I've figured out the order for most of it, except for this. The old man pulled a packet of papers, folded lengthwise, from the back of the book. He unfolded it and pushed it over to Danny. The first page was completely blank except for 2 words: the detector. Confused, Danny once again looked at the old man for some answers. The old man simply smiled and pointed at the papers. Danny flipped open to the first page, and there, in the center of the page, was a picture of him. He shot another look at the old man, but was greeted with the same finger pointed back to the pages. Danny flipped through page after page, all of it about him. Photos from when he was a child next to clippings from government documents with his personal details, all of it photocopied from the originals. "What the hell is this?" Danny shouted entirely too loudly for the deathly quiet of the library. The old man reached out and covered Danny's hand with his, a look of concern in his eyes. "I know this is a lot to take in, but please sit down and hear me out. There is a way out." Danny snapped out of his memories to the smell of something burning. He dropped the bowl, barely hearing it clatter to the floor as he grabbed the mitts and raced over to the oven. He flung it open wide and pulled the casserole dish out and dropped it onto the range on the top of the oven. He swiped at the air, trying his best to clear the smoke before the detectors went off. Damn it, he'd burnt them. He was too lost in his own mind and must have not heard the timer go off. Mom would be furious. Frustrated, Danny dumped the contents into the trash to take out later. With nothing else left to prepare, he pulled out various plates, bowls, and platters, and began preparing everything for the big meal. It took a few trips to get everything to the table by himself, but with the last bowl set down in front of him, he was done. He smiled at the rest of his family, all gathered there around the table. It was just like he'd pictured it. His mouth watered from the intoxicating aroma of the food, and he began to shovel all types of food onto his plate. He ate ravenously, as if he hadn't eaten in months, barely chewing some things in an effort to satiate his hunger. The old man had said that detecting and disposing of suspected kerosene before the martyr arrived would be hard work. But Danny didn't know he'd be so hungry after. And Danny had to take care of the three of them. Even more effort. Danny looked around at his family, but they all just sat there silently. The chemical cocktail he'd injected into their veins having long done its work to dispose of them. Their mouths sewn shut to block the screams, and the zip ties that bound their wrists and ankles still holding them upright in their chairs. It had been difficult, but Danny reminded himself it was for the good of humanity. So he ate, knowing his work had only begun. Thank you for listening to These Dark Spaces. We hope you enjoyed this story. You can find out more about us at thesedarkspaces.com or follow us on Twitter at thesedarkspaces. If you've enjoyed listening, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite listening platform. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, keep your senses sharp, and your mind open.